All right, so I'm currently on the phone with Benedict. He's another one of the musicians that reached out to me from across the larger pond about the interview series. So I'm going to go ahead and give him the chance to introduce himself.
Oh, hi, Alexander and listeners. My name is Benedict. Benedict Roff-Marsh is the full name. Helps you find me online. I just saw there was an opportunity to present who I am. I'd seen what Alexander was doing, and I thought, yeah, nice to have a conversation.
Excellent,
What
very
I
cool.
do,
Oh, yeah, go
what I
ahead.
do is I'm a mix engineer and a record producer, but not beat maker. I hate to have to point that out, but so many times, you're talking to people and it's like, "Oh, you're a producer. Can you make me a beat?" And it's like, no. I'm a little bit of a stickler for terms.
Hmm.
It's like if you're in an operating theater and the surgeon asks for a particular scalpel and you hand him some random thing, it's not going to end well for someone.
Right.
Terms have a purpose for a purpose, so that we're all on the same page. A record producer, and I specialize in helping develop acts. One of the problems that we've generated with the whole technology allowing everybody to access the shelves. It's like anybody can pop a record on the shelf now in the shop. It's so easy. One of the problems there is that there isn't any way for people to understand the difference between just putting something on the shelf and creating the kind of product that the audience are actually going to connect with. And that role traditionally was taken by a combination of the A&R guy at the record. The record label would have A&R scouts, and they would find someone who'd go, I reckon this person's going to be great. So they'd see an act like, say, Fleetwood Mac,
Hmm.
and they'd sign them, but they wouldn't necessarily put them in the studio for up to a couple of years. In that time, they'd be developing the act so that when their first record came out, when the general public first became aware of them, there was a sense of, you know, this is good. This worked for me. I reckon I'm going to get that record.
Hmm.
And that period is artist development. So it's a combination of A&R, to some extent managers, but often the record producers themselves working with the act, finding who their real audience is going to be. Because it's never everybody 8 to 80, which is marketing
Right.
101 misstep. Uh, and how to get their story in a way that people are going to hear it and go, oh my, that's amazing.
So when you say you're a record producer, would you say that that is more in line, like what you just described, is more in line with how you look at production versus conversely, you said just a beat maker. So though that's the way you're differentiating the two.
Well, I'm a record producer in the true sense of the term. So if we look at the classic record producers, Sir George Martin, Alan Parsons, Mutt Lang, um, then that's what those record producers do. Trevor Horn, the record producers vary because we're all a varied bunch and we're generally a pretty interesting bunch.
Hmm.
Rick Rubin's another example of a modern record producer who still works like a classic record producer.
Hmm.
And the issue there is just that so many people now are saying producer when what they actually mean is as somebody who's putting together the music. And invariably, because there's so much rap, trap, hip hop, what have you, all they
Hmm.
think of is their own little world.
Hmm.
And that's still required. Rick Rubin is famous for having developed uh, rap hip hop in the public mind as to
Hmm.
being a lot of what it is, even though he's not a rapper. I mean, he's a white guy with a funny head of hair. So the record producer, yeah, the record producer is the guy who helps transition the vision of the performer. And
Hmm.
and to be perfectly honest, a lot of performers don't really have any vision past making a noise. And while
Sure.
that's okay, when you put down a record, it should have a vision. It should have a meta story. In other words, a story that's bigger than itself.
Hmm.
One of my favorite examples of that, and I know it's not going to relate to the hip hop crowd, is Meatloaf's "Bat Out of Hell."
Hmm. Sure.
You think that "Bat Out of Hell" is really just, oh, it's the title song because it's the first song on the record, and it's the one about the guy who rides this motorbike off a cliff because he's an idiot. But then when you spend some time inside that record, you realize that every single one of those songs that Steinman wrote is about going at something like a bat out of hell, pushing
Hmm.
ourselves beyond necessarily even common sense, and
Sure.
just going, oh, well, I'm here. I'm just going to do it. Even if I don't really know what I'm doing and it's possibly a little silly, I'm just going to do it. And so the record, once it comes together, for whatever reason, tells this greater story. And records that last somehow manage to tell a greater story. It can be very tenuous. It's not about making a concept record like War of the Worlds,
Hmm.
but about being able to get across this greater story. I just saw that the On Vogue album, that's come up for is it 30 years or something or other now, and that record, while it was never a favorite of mine, it has a meta story
Hmm.
of that we're these girls, we're sexy, and we're kicking it ourselves. Not at all dissimilar from what the Spice Girls did. They
Sure.
carried this meta story with them,
Yep.
and a producer and is a lot about helping transition these kind of random songs or random ideas into something that comes across to the audience as a meta story.
Yep. I completely agree. So let's get into a little details here. How did you kind of first decide that you wanted to do this? What was your first connection to music that kind of pushed you down this road?
People seem to have easy answers for this. I know that there are lots of little moments in my life. As to say exactly which one was it, I have no idea. In
Hmm.
terms of the time where I sort of said, hey, you know what, I'm going to grow up to be Alan Parsons. Um, that sort of happened probably somewhere where I was around 16, where I suddenly started to understand what the role of the record producer was. Listening to the radio and realizing that there were certain names that would appear across different records, and you would hear a quality of work that was not in the frequency range or any of that kind of silly stuff. It was in the art that if you were listening to a record and it turns out that it was Alan Parsons behind that in some way, shape, or form, chances are it was going to have a certain feel. If it had Mutt Lang behind it, then it sure has a certain feel.
Hmm.
And probably four massive radio singles that 20, 30 years later are still on the radio. Who's going to drive you home? Uh, and it wasn't about the power, it was about there is this way to help tell stories, to pass these messages. So if I track back beyond that, obviously listening to the radio and hearing songs, and then picking up cassettes at the library, because the library would loan out cassettes. So I'd bring them home and put them on and have a listen to them. And I got some amazing, amazing things kind of randomly. So the much ignored and even maligned Deep Purple, their third record, starts out with Chasing Shadows. And it's like, what an awesome record as a whole. And it was that as a whole that really kind of captured me. Moving back in time, uh, just those moments where I would turn on Countdown, which was the show run by Molly Meldrum in Australia on Sunday afternoon or evening, and he would tell us, do yourself a favor, get into this thing. And the first time that the Clash's London Calling came on, I would have been probably 10. So at 10, you're not really keyed into understanding a lot of the inner details of things,
Hmm.
let alone the economics that they were talking about. But there was just something about that moment of the video with all its grayness and the song. Um, the Ice Age is coming, the world's at an end. It keyed into a lot of things that I was already into, watching Logan's Run and all that sort of stuff. And again, it was the hugeness of the story. It's easy to just listen to it for 2 seconds, the song, the Clash for 2 seconds, go, oh, yeah, well, but there's an immensity to that story, which is way beyond the mixing or the bass playing or the slurred vocals. And that sort of just goes back. There were moments where, when my father brought home a cassette with Jonathan Livingston Seagull on it, and I would sit there and obsessively listen to Neil Diamond's Jonathan Livingston Seagull album over and over and over. And I did the same with Jan and Dean's story. We saw the movie on TV, and KTEL put out the record, and I was like, I gotta have it, I gotta have it, and I got it. And Surf City's number one. And that's, I know now, part of the sort of autism spectrum habits. We're prone to doing that. But across all of these things, there was this huge story. They build a world. There's a scene built. There's a story that travels through them, a lot like the whole Lord of the Rings, not the movies. Like you read the book and it's massive, the amount of travel, but it always comes back home. And that obviously set me to doing that. In that moment where I'd started to understand that who really helped make these records come out like that was the record producer. And obviously at that time, with people like Alan Parsons and Trevor Horn, who were not only record producers, but they were standing on both sides of the fence at once. And the idea that you could also be making these things yourself, because I never saw myself as a player.
Sure, definitely. So that was a lot of information that led you up to, currently being involved in production and everything. So do you have a number of acts that you currently work with, or do you open your studio for other people to come in and you kind of show them the ropes per se?
It sort of varies over time. I've been developing. I rarely have a lot of clients at once. What I do is a little too esoteric for most people, which is sort of a shame, but that's just how it goes. I've had a client. I still have him as a client, but we finished 2 records for him. One under his name, one under a band name. He approached me initially just saying, "Hey, I want to learn to mix because I'm writing songs," and he was trying to move his songs to other people and basically do the thing of being the sort of the songwriter or the person that helps people finish their songs, and so that they can come into a studio and have it all done for them and pushed out the other end, and they can dump it on Spotify to get ignored. And he wanted to learn how to mix. And I thought, well, there's some potential in this guy. He we spoke in ways that we were able to connect. So I rarely bring people into my studio because I don't run a fancy studio. Most of the pictures that you see of people's studio online are just absurd. I find it kind of demeaning. But he came in and he was really nice, and we went through, and he didn't want to get hands-on to start with. He wanted me to mix a track that he'd put together for someone. Someone had come to him with a fragment of a song, and he turned it into a full song. And the more I worked in his song, it was like a little overproduced in the sense that it had so many layers of everything. But the more I got into his layers of everything, the more it was like, this guy's really talented. That I realized that he has this innate musical intelligence that you see in a like a Dave Stewart of the Eurythmics, or Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys. There are some people who just have this innate musical intelligence, and that was there. And the more I dug in and started to discover what he had in terms of songs, and got to the point where I said, look, send me over what you've got, because I think it's time you made a record. Because we were still working along the lines of setting him up to be able to kind of run his front to bring people in and develop their stuff. And there were a couple of pop songs that I pulled straight off and said, okay, let's do these. Let's see what else you've got. He sent over, I think he said that in the end it was about 100 songs. So I spent some time. I actually listened to them all. I just put them all on in sections, A to Z, and listened to them whilst slaying monsters. And whatever jumped out, to me as like that sounds like a either a radio song or a really good album track. Then I just noted them down, and at the end of it, I had an album's worth of stuff. But the amazing thing was that the album's worth of stuff that I had told a different story from what he was trying to tell me he was doing.
Okay.
That in there was a it's hard to classify. Everybody's created these stupid sub genres. My trap with a twist of death metal kind of like yeah,
Sure.
ridiculous. But there was a light country soft rock. Soft rock became an insulting term, but I'm listening to these things thinking, you know what? There's a James Taylor, there's a Jackson Bryan, there's these things in here. Whilst having that ability with some of the songs to put them on radio, not as exactly the same as I don't know who the current names are in Bro Country, Florida, Georgia, or whatever. I guess Jason Aldean, not exactly like that, but close enough to provide a bridge to the sort of the deeper, more subtle stories that he's telling. And so I said to him, "This is the record you should be making." And initially, he's a bit like, but, still trying to kind of write songs to create wannabe Taylor Swifts and Ed Sheepmans.
Sure.
I've been saying to him all along, that's a dead end because the last thing the world needs is another Taylor Swift. Why? Because Taylor Swift's got it covered.
Yeah.
She's good at doing that. The world doesn't want another Beyonce because Beyonce's good at doing Beyonce.
Yeah.
And the people who like and listen only to Beyonce, listen only to Beyonce. They don't listen to new acts. So the idea of trying to clone other acts is just, it's a marketing losing proposition.
Yeah.
Well, it's good to have some similarities. You've got to create something different. So I said to him, what I will do with you is we'll tidy up those pop tracks, put them out one by one, just showing your capabilities with writing, arranging, what have you. But then we're going to work on this album. And that album is going to tell a different story. It's going to show a very different side of you. And he found it hard. He balked at the beginning. And then it suddenly sort of started to get through to him. I was encouraging him to listen to the acts that I was mentioning, like Jackson Bryan and James Taylor, and
Mhm.
he thought he knew of them because he's a lot younger than me. But then when he sat down and listened to them, he was like, "Oh, that's what I set out to do in the beginning." And so he really got to that point. It took time, and that's
Mhm.
artist development. It took time for him to realize what his real message was,
Sure.
and that I'd found that in his material. And we got that record down, and it's out now. He was supposed to come out at the day of the launch party, but the launch party had to get put back a month because the
Mhm.
venue flooded, because the whole
Oh,
area flooded.
great.
Um, but the reception that he's getting, not for the record, because it's virtually impossible to get anyone to listen to a record, especially online. The reception that he's getting anytime he goes out, and mostly he's still only playing open mics and the like. But the reception he gets is just people drop their jaws, and almost every outing, someone comes up to him saying, "Can I get you to play this?" And they're not like pathetic piddling little, you pay me and I'll get you some exposure kind of events. They're actual events. And there's somebody even talking about trying to introduce him to one of the well the the family, the king and queen of country in Australia. They're talking about trying to see if they can introduce him to him. And my point here is just that if Jake had gone just straight out and started playing his songs, they wouldn't really have gotten the reaction that he's getting now. But because we took the time to get him into where he really belongs, as in his heart, he's now on message. When he goes out there and sings a song, he's on message. And that resonates far more than anything else. If you go back and you have a look at the Clash's London Call and you just listen to the record, that's powerful because those guys are on message. Um, It's not about towing a political line or whatever. It's just there is a strong belief in what they're doing.
Sure.
Uh,
So
and we've got Jake on that.
you mentioned that that album is out there and available. Do you also have like a website and stuff for your services at large? Like, where can people find you to get a hold of you?
BenedictRoff-Marsh.com. So it's my name, BenedictRoffMarsh.com. And it walks through a lot. There is a lot there. As you can tell, I talk a lot, I write a lot, I try
Sure.
to explain all of the things that you're likely to meet. I
Okay.
know that there's a fashion to rush in headlong and then make every mistake in the book. But you know what? I've made every mistake in the book and I'm still making them.
Hmm.
My advantage is that I have made those mistakes. I've been almost signed a couple of times and things have gone wrong. Um, I made a mistake in not forcing myself to learn guitar so I could at least be pickup in a dance act or a country band. Um, I've made all those mistakes and I can help people not make those mistakes themselves because I know why people make those mistakes. It's
Okay,
about
so
helping
if
people.
you wanted to kind of sum up like what you've learned from making those mistakes into a general message, how would you put that out there?
One word: fear. We have fear, and that is that what happens if somebody doesn't like this? What happens if somebody says you suck? What happens if suddenly this happens? You know that one moment I'm just invisible Benedict, and the next I'm Billy Idol, you know, punching Elton John on the Grammys. What the hell happens there? That's pretty frightening. Expletive deleted. Um, so the biggest issue that I see with people is fear. And one of the problems with trying to deal with your own fear yourself is that you're using the brain that's creating the fear to supposedly uncreate the fear. You see the problem?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, because you're just going to go in the same circle. The brain that's trying to avoid is trying to save you, but it will create more reasons why you shouldn't. And that's why we see so many truly bizarre things like wall padding in studios. Oh no, man, you can't have a studio, you can't make a record if you don't have wall padding. It's like, piss off. Records in the in the 70s were commonly made in almost like the kitchen. They were made in rooms that had absolutely nothing. Some guy just had his electric piano and a microphone. If you listen to Jackson's Brand's Running on Empty record, you read the liner notes and you find that some of those songs were recorded in motel rooms with a drum kit, which was a cardboard box. There was no wall padding. Yeah, there was nothing. You know, you make the record,
I think in a
and the
lot of
fear
those
is the thing that does
instances,
it.
people are just trying, they're chasing, a pure sound. And that's why, they're trying to eliminate all of the room noise. They're trying to eliminate any extra bit of signal that could go into the recording that could affect the way it sounds. And
I get that, but that's the mental excuse.
yeah,
You know,
it's the fear.
when you listen to amazing records, they're often chock full of strange noises.
Hmm.
Grab Kraftwerk's Man Machine album, "We Are the Robots." There are lots of times where you can hear the noise gates opening and closing. The reality is these old records are full of noise. Steve Miller Band's Big Old Jet Airliner, the vocal comes in with a sound, which would just never be allowed. People would be obsessively going into Reaper and chop, 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 so that we don't have a on the
Yeah,
beginning of the vocal.
yeah,
But you know
definitely.
what? That is just a stunning song. That song stayed on rock radio for, well, I think it was 20, 30 years old when I started hearing it. And sorry, I do get riled up on this because this obsession with like, oh, but we have to have a clean sound. It's a way of saying, oh, if only I could make it perfect, then I could be perfect. You know what? The reason that Jackson Bryan can go anywhere and be perfect, even though he's prone to singing flat half the time, he's not as bad as he used to be. is because he managed to know that when it came time for telling his story, the perfection is not in some kind of technical perfection of his singing in tune or in time or having no background noise. It's in telling a compelling story. And that's the thing that people need to be getting back to. As indie artists, we're presented with an amazing opportunity at the moment because it's actually technically amazingly easy to put a record on Bandcamp and start to generate fans. But what do people do? No, they find all these obsessive, ridiculous reasons like, oh no, I can hear like minus 98 dB of like hiss, man, but I can't make my record, man. That's like, it's wrong. It's really messed up.
Mm.
Because back in the 60s or 70s or even the 80s, they would go, no one can hear it. They're listening on a 2-inch paper cone inside a little plastic box in a tranny that goes in their pocket. They don't know, and you know what? They don't care.
Right.
There's a quote I often use from Gene Simmons. To paraphrase him, he said, you know, guitarists go on and on about the tone of their guitar. He says they're wrong and they're stupid because the fans don't care. All the kids care about is, does this rock me?
Mm-hmm.
And that's absolutely pivotal information that's just lost or screamed over in groups and forums where people go on about, no, thou must this, that, and the other. And it's just like, if I don't have wall padding and I don't have Pro Q3, I'm apparently not allowed to make a record.
Right. It's
You go
ridiculous.
tell Meatloaf that. You go tell Jackson Browne that. You go tell ABBA that. You go tell Kiss that. It is ridiculous. And this is a mindset that I understand where it comes from, but it's being perpetuated. And the people who are perpetuating them that are setting themselves up as being the pros, the leaders of the industry. And I can tell you where they're leading people to, and it's hell. It's not a cool death metal kind of a hell. It's the hell of week in, week out, sitting there having to live with your fear. The best thing to do with fear is to step over it. And while that's very, very easy to say, stick a little fridge magnet on the front of your monitor, so you turn on your door and you go step over the fear because you read the fridge magnet stuck to your screen. It doesn't get you there. The idea is a beginning, but often you need someone to help you orient, to know what's important. Because if you knew what your story was, you'd be following it. It'd be happening for you already. You wouldn't be needing anybody. But there's a reason why David Bowie, one of the most creative cats in rock and roll, there's a reason why when Bowie went into the studio, he took a producer. And wonder why that was.
To
Because he
rein in
wanted to
that
make
message.
he wanted to make sure that when his record was done, that it was A, listenable. Last thing you'd want to do is create something like Smile. No offense, Brian, but there's no point putting a message down that's just too out there for your audience to be able to get. And there's no point making a record that's 47 hours long because you've put in every possible point that could be part of your story. Part of the reason that Ziggy Stardust works so well is because it is not 47 hours long. It's going to take up, 37, 40 minutes of our life.
Mm-hmm.
And each of those songs, while they don't tell a coherent story, they build this world. And it's fascinating, and we can pour ourselves into that world and fill out the little details that Bowie and his producer decided not to put in.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't write a song about the brickwork because it's not needed. Because they wrote songs about what it feels like to be in that world.
So what would be like the end message, last word that you would want to put out to like kind of sum up your experience and try to motivate somebody that, you know, hasn't really heard the type of message that you're saying?
Well, I guess the first thing is listen. You know, look at those times where what got you into rock and roll, what got you into hip hop, or got you into whatever it is that you're into. And if it was just that you heard this massive beat and you said, I want to be the powerful guy in the room, okay, fair enough. But the people who tend to make it are those who, like my story with the Clash, London Calling, or Jonathan Livingston's Seagull. They see or hear this music thing, and there's an indescribable magic to it. Kind of like Between the Notes when Dave Gilmour from Pink Floyd's playing. It's kind of like you glimpse God, and that means that this is a passion for you. It's not a hobby; it's a drive. And what you've got to do is whatever it takes to get you there. And stop listening to most of what you're seeing and hearing in 2-minute tutorials that claim all of this is going to be easy if you just pick up their sample pack. And start working out what your story is. Who are you as an act? Look at those people who have very clear acts, and you can pick them in a heartbeat, like Alice Cooper. Alice Cooper's a complex kind of a cat as an artist, but Alice Cooper as a concept is, at least at the beginning, incredibly easy to grasp. King Diamond, Kiss, Spice Girls. Work out who you are, what's your thing, and what's the message that you're telling. And if it's like, oh, I want to bring world peace, you are wrong. If you want people to feel happy and comforted, great. That's a thing you can do, but then you've got to work out what's your way of bringing that. Is it screaming like a banshee? Is it what? What is that? And you've got to work out how to do that. But working it out on your own is not always easy. You need to work with others. So while the DIY message has been the one that the door industry have pushed on people over the past 20 or so years, really what they've ended up encouraging is a DOA mentality, because it's do it only alone. And DOA, we all know what that means. I see acts after act that could have potential die on the vine because they refuse to work with anybody. They refuse to develop what their message is, to have a clear sense of who they are, and then do the groundwork of building a back line, the people that they're working with, a sense of location, and make the mistake of going out and just splattering their stuff all over Spotify and SoundCloud and thinking that if they're everybody everywhere will be able to hear them, that they'll get found. It don't work that way. Go into the backstory of any act, including Kiss. Look at the work they had to do to create a location for people to come find them. Look up the Marquee, the 100 Club, CBGBs. That's what I'm talking about. So you get that, and then start to develop bands. You got to develop them. You got to develop them one by one, and that means connecting with people. Just as anybody who's listened to me this long will go, I reckon I connected with that guy. I think I understand what he's talking about, and hopefully that person will go out and do something about it, either on their own or with other people. They'll say, hey, look, I heard this guy. Let's follow what he's talking about. Maybe one or two will reach out to me directly. Obviously, that's great. That's what I do. But work out how to be the captain of your own ship rather than letting yourself get tossed around by your fears in the form of what everyone tells you should do. Because in reality, most of that is actually taking you in the completely wrong direction. Once we got Jake in the right direction, his record Falling Down in Love, once he goes out, as I say, he sits on stage, he opens his mouth, he starts singing his lead song, Hopeless as a Star, and people go, oh my, where has this been?